My name is Rusty Eisenberg. I am a vice chair and co-founder of Brooklyn for Peace. As many of you know, we have been in the neighborhood for about 25 years. It appears to us that there's no danger that the cause of peace is going to willow away anytime soon. We've unfortunately endlessly reinvigorated by the fact that this country keeps going into increased numbers of wars. We are engaged in a wide variety of activities. Many of you are part of that. If you're not part of it and would like to join up, we have more projects than people, and we'd really be very, very happy to welcome all of you. We need people right now as much as we've needed at any time. We have this evening Elizabeth Gould and Paul Fitzgerald, who are the authors of Invisible History, Afghanistan's Untold Story. If you haven't already done so, we are selling their books in the back and milling around times. I want to encourage all of you to consider purchasing one of these books. They have come down today from Boston to talk with us. We really appreciate their being here and being willing to give their time for tonight. Just to set the tone a little bit, I think I spoke with the speakers before coming here, and this question of Afghanistan is really challenging for people. It's a tougher question than Iraq. I mean, sometimes in the anti-war movement, we're just in our heads saying, "Oh, wars are bad, and this is another thing to be against." But the reality is that for millions of Americans, and probably for people sitting in this room, this is a very, very challenging and complex question. Unlike Iraq, which seemed, like totally gratuitous, like why are we going there? What sense does that make? Afghanistan obviously has a different place in the 9/11 story, and the internal dynamics in Afghanistan are challenging for us. And I suspect that every person in this room, at one time or another, has been asking themselves, well, what does happen if the U.S. leaves? So this is really not an easy question. We simplify things for postcards, but they're not simple. And part of what Elizabeth and Paul want to do tonight is to back up and to really provide some historical analysis, which we don't get to hear too much of, and we're talking about this at dinner. Of course, the first question everybody asks at the end of their talk is, what should we do? But the level of ignorance about the subject, or the fact that there is a very long history that has brought us to this moment, that sort of gets erased in the media. And that's really what they have to contribute tonight. It's one reason I'm really happy that they're with us. This Afghanistan story is one that they have followed for the past 30 years. And they told me not to spend a lot of time introducing them, because they're going to introduce themselves. But just really quickly, they were the first Western journalists to come back into Afghanistan after the Soviet invasion. The Western press was kicked out. They were the first people to come back in 1981 on a CBS visa. They came back again in 1983, and then they were back again in 2002. So their experience of the society and the history is a little bit different from what we normally have an opportunity to hear. They're going to tell you a bit more about themselves and their experience, but I really want to turn this over to them, and we're going to go back in time and get some history that we don't always get a chance to hear. So please join me in welcoming Paul and Elizabeth.
Okay, we're going to sit down for this.
You mind?
You mind if we sit down? It's been a long flight. You'll have to excuse us. We came dressed for a winter up in Boston, so.
This weather is unbelievable.
It's suddenly
being in the
warm.
tropics.
It's been about 60 degrees for the last 6 weeks. I'm used to
Is
it.
it okay now?
Can you hear us? We want to thank everyone here at Brooklyn for Peace and all the other wonderful people who welcomed us here this evening.
That's fine. That's fine.
Friends, the Afghans, who came this evening. To our other filmmaker who is here this evening. To Kathleen, thank you for being here. To our relatives, thank you for being here. Afghanistan is a very special story, and We want to start out tonight by, we know you want to know what's going on today. As Rusty mentioned to you, it's simply a maze trying to figure out exactly what's going on in Afghanistan from the nightly news reports. And we found that out too in 1979. And so what we want to do tonight is kind of give you the basis of how we came to understand Afghanistan was such an important place and why we knew that it would play such an important role in America's future. So we're going to read some prepared remarks, and then we want to quickly get to the discussion so that we can kind of bring it up to date. Over the last 30 years, Afghanistan has been at the center of a campaign of disinformation. The Soviet invasion paved the road for the Reagan agenda and the rise of the new right, but it also established many false assumptions about the country that continue to undermine American efforts to find a viable solution to the current crisis. As part of the Cold War mindset, Afghanistan was painted in the American media with the broad brush of failed British colonialism. While suiting American foreign policy goals, this carefully crafted but fantasy Afghanistan, especially in the case of Charlie Wilson's war, now leaves the American people and the United States government itself at a loss for what to do. Neither Soviet communism nor Afghanistan survived this mythologizing process, but neither has the United States come to grips with its own role in turning that country, in the words of Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, into a Central Asian Valhalla. I had hoped that after 30 years, the history of the American campaign to lure the Soviet Union into its own Vietnam and Afghanistan and hold them there would have become common knowledge. I had hoped that after nearly 8 years of US and NATO occupation, a less ideological approach to the complex workings of Afghan society might have emerged. But once in, disinformation is not easy to get out of the system. In February, a Boston Globe columnist reminded me that the Cold War dialogue of the 50s, 60s, and 70s is still the language of the empire. Quote, "It wasn't until the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979, he wrote, that Carter finally woke to his naivete. Carter's failure to understand the threat posed by the Soviet Empire had costly consequences for America and the world. Will that pattern now be repeated with Barack Obama and the threat from radical Islam?" As the host of a weekly public affairs program on Pat Robertson's Christian Broadcasting Network affiliate in Boston in 1979, I was very familiar with Cold War scare tactics. It was my obligation to balance Robertson's right-wing Apocalypse is Coming programming. So when Robertson aired an anti-detente documentary as a public service, it gave us the opportunity to take on the nuclear arms race. In the summer of 1979, we began production of a documentary called The Arms Race in the Economy, A Delicate Balance. During the next months, numerous experts, including John Kenneth Galbraith, lent their experience to our understanding of the unseen damage that abandoning arms reduction in detente would represent to our civilian economy. Galbraith insisted that bringing back the Cold War would ultimately ruin the American economy, not just by redirecting American money away from infrastructure and our industrial base, but by further pushing the country towards a moral and spiritual dead end. In hindsight, we know that détente's opponents were wrong. The Soviet Union was dying, driven by its weakness and not by its strength. But when the Soviets crossed their southern border into Afghanistan, it played out on America's TV screens like a World War II John Wayne Hollywood movie. Hardly a soul realized that a trap had been set to give the Soviets their own Vietnam, and the Soviets had taken the bait. A crop of neoconservative experts appeared on the scene claiming that the Soviets were running out of oil and using Afghanistan as a staging ground to conquer the Middle East and eventually even Europe.